They spent millions trying to stop you, and that alone should tell you who you are becoming. What you're about to hear isn't hype, it's reality. There was a plan, a massive plan, backed by money, power, and influence, designed to control growth, crush potential, and turn ordinary people into assets, tools, and obedient followers. Billions were poured into one dangerous experiment built on fear, manipulation, and psychological pressure. The goal was simple: break people piece by piece, remove independent thinking, and keep all control at the top. But here's what they didn't plan for. You. One wrong move changed everything. The experiment backfired. Awareness became the real threat. The very people they tried to weaken started seeing clearly, pushing back and rising. Dark industries began to collapse. Systems started eating themselves. And the one at the top lost control, reputation, and everything he built. They tried to destroy you. But instead, they created you. Stronger, sharper, untouchable. Before we continue, pause for a second. Hit the like button. Subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers, and comment Mr. Ledger to show you're locked in. Stay till the end, because this message is about resilience, power, and what happens when pressure fails to break you. They didn't attack you openly. They didn't challenge you face to face. Instead, they worked in silence. Behind closed doors, powerful people signed checks worth millions just to slow you down, confuse you, and exhaust you. Your growth scared them because it couldn't be controlled. When someone invests that much money just to stop you, understand one thing clearly: you are already dangerous to their system. They tracked your moves, studied your habits, and tried to predict your next step. Every success you achieved forced them to spend more, panic more, and scheme harder. While you were simply trying to survive, they were burning money just to keep you small. That alone proves your value. Nobody wastes resources on something meaningless. What they never understood was this: pressure doesn't destroy real fighters. It sharpens them. Every obstacle they placed in your path trained you for something bigger. Every delay made you smarter. While they thought they were stopping you, they were unknowingly preparing you. This was never about you alone. You were part of something much bigger. There was a hidden plan to control how people think, how they act, and how they react. The goal was simple: remove independent thinking and replace it with fear, dependence, and obedience. A controlled population is profitable. A free mind is dangerous. They wanted people tired, confused, and desperate. When people are exhausted, they stop asking questions. When they stop questioning, they become easy to lead. This plan wasn't loud or violent. It was psychological, quiet manipulation, slow conditioning, a system designed to feel normal while draining people from the inside. But plans built on control always underestimate one thing: human awareness. You cannot fully cage curiosity. You cannot permanently silence instinct. And once people start noticing patterns, the illusion cracks. Power was used not to protect, but to dominate. Rules were bent. Systems were abused. Pressure was applied from every angle to make people feel small and helpless. The intention was clear: break confidence, erase courage, and make resistance feel pointless. They wanted people to believe they were weak, replaceable, and powerless. Because once someone believes that, they stop fighting. They accept unfairness. They settle for survival instead of growth. That belief was the real weapon. But power used without morality always collapses. When too many people are pushed too far, resistance doesn't disappear. It multiplies. And the very people they tried to crush began to harden instead. In their world, people were not humans. They were numbers, data, resources, assets to be used, sold, and discarded. Productivity mattered more than dignity. Profit mattered more than lives. This mindset created an empire, but it also planted the seeds of its destruction. They thought if people were kept busy, scared, and dependent, they would never rebel. They thought survival would keep everyone silent. But humans are not machines. You can exploit labor, but you cannot permanently erase self-respect. The moment people realized they were being used, something shifted. Anger replaced fear. Awareness replaced confusion. And once that switch flips, control becomes impossible. This wasn't a small gamble, it was everything. Entire fortunes were placed on one experiment: total control. They believed that if they could master human behavior, they could own the future. Billions were poured into influence, manipulation, and suppression. But when someone bets everything on one plan, one mistake becomes fatal. There was no backup, no exit strategy, just arrogance disguised as confidence. History proves this again and again. Experiments that ignore human unpredictability always fail, because humans don't move in straight lines. And when pressure peaks, reaction becomes explosive. Fear was the main weapon, not guns, not chains. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being isolated. Psychological warfare works best when people don't even realize they're under attack. They flooded minds with doubt and exhaustion. They made people question themselves instead of the system. That's how control stays invisible. But fear has a limit. When people have nothing left to lose, fear loses its power. And that's when control starts to collapse. They got careless, overconfident. They pushed too hard, too fast. One wrong move exposed the entire structure. What was meant to stay hidden became visible. That single mistake triggered a chain reaction. Trust eroded, questions spread, doubt infected the system itself. And once doubt enters power, it spreads like fire. Empires don't fall from outside attacks. They fall from internal cracks. This was the beginning of the end. The very people they tested became unpredictable. Instead of obedience, they developed awareness. Instead of silence, they found a voice. The experiment produced the opposite result. Resistance doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like thinking differently, acting independently, refusing to be programmed. What they created was not control, but awakening, and that terrified them more than anything else. Awareness spreads faster than fear. Once one person sees the truth, they influence others without even trying. Conversations change, behavior shifts, loyalty fades. You cannot arrest an idea. You cannot silence understanding. Awareness doesn't need leaders. It grows naturally. This was the moment power truly panicked, because awareness cannot be reversed. When control weakens, systems turn inward. Blame replaces strategy. Loyalty disappears. Everyone tries to protect themselves. Resources are wasted. Decisions become desperate. The structure begins collapsing from the inside. What looked invincible suddenly looked fragile. And fragility spreads fast. Industries built on exploitation don't survive exposure. Once people stop believing the lie, profit vanishes. Influence fades. Control dissolves. Losses piled up. Investments failed. Power networks broke apart. The collapse wasn't loud, but it was irreversible. What was built on manipulation couldn't survive truth. At the top sat someone who thought they owned the game. But control is an illusion. The moment people stop following, power disappears. Money couldn't save him. Authority couldn't protect him. Influence evaporated overnight. He didn't just lose wealth, he lost relevance. And that is the hardest loss of all. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with clarity, with refusal, with independence. The same people labeled common proved unstoppable. They adapted, they learned, they evolved. Strength isn't about position, it's about resilience. Once you survive the worst, fear loses its grip. You become untouchable, not because you're protected, but because you're prepared. They can't control someone who understands the game. They can't manipulate someone who sees through it. You stopped being a target the moment you stopped believing their limits. Everything they did to break you shaped you instead. Pressure gave you vision. Resistance gave you strength. Opposition gave you clarity. They invested millions to stop you and ended up building someone they could never control. Remember this: when powerful people try to destroy you, it's because your existence threatens their future. And that means you were never weak. You were early. The moment they understood that fear no longer worked on you, everything changed. Fear was their strongest weapon, and you walked straight through it without bowing your head. You didn't scream, you didn't beg, and you didn't collapse the way they expected. You stood there, silent, steady, unbroken. That terrified them more than rebellion ever could, because a person who isn't afraid cannot be controlled, cannot be threatened, and cannot be bought. When power realizes fear has lost its grip, it starts losing its authority. And that is exactly where their downfall began. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped defending your choices. You stopped trying to prove your worth. And that silence spoke louder than all their warnings combined. They were used to reactions, anger, desperation, confusion, but you gave them none. Silence is dangerous to manipulators because it means their tactics no longer reach you. In that quiet strength, you reclaimed your space, your mind, and your direction, and they knew then that they had lost access to you completely. They thought your patience meant surrender. They believed waiting meant you were afraid to act. What they failed to see was that patience was your preparation, not your pause. While they celebrated too early, you were learning, adapting, and sharpening your instincts. Patience gave you clarity, and clarity gave you power. When you finally moved, it wasn't emotional. It was precise, and by then, it was already too late for them to react. You cannot rule people who no longer respect the system. Obedience fades the moment respect disappears, and respect disappears when people see injustice clearly. They demanded loyalty without earning it, compliance without fairness, and effort without dignity. That imbalance broke everything. Once respect was gone, the system became hollow, loud on the outside, empty on the inside, and collapse became inevitable. Under pressure, most people crack, but pressure didn't destroy you. It exposed what was already there. It revealed resilience, focus, and a level of endurance they never calculated. Every setback hardened your mindset. Every attack refined your instincts. While they believed pressure would crush you, it actually showed you who you really were. And once you saw that, there was no going back. They were busy playing the game for short-term wins, blind to the long-term consequences. You, on the other hand, studied it. You observed patterns, motives, and weaknesses. You didn't rush. You learned. Knowledge became your armor. Awareness became your weapon. And while they relied on power, you relied on understanding, which always outlasts authority. Manipulation only works on the unaware. The moment intelligence enters the room, manipulation collapses. You began seeing through the narratives, the distractions, and the fake urgency they created. Once you understood how they moved, their influence lost weight. Intelligence doesn't fight manipulation. It ignores it. And that makes manipulators powerless. Their models, plans, and calculations were built on predictable behavior. You were the variable they never accounted for. You didn't follow patterns. You didn't respond the way others did. You didn't move emotionally. And unpredictability is the enemy of control. When someone cannot be predicted, they cannot be managed. And that is when fear shifts to the other side. You stopped seeking validation. You no longer needed permission to move forward. That independence stripped them of leverage. When someone doesn't need approval, shame loses power, guilt loses force, and pressure becomes meaningless. You became self-directed, and that made you unstoppable. The system was designed for followers, not thinkers. It functioned smoothly as long as people stayed within its mental boundaries. The moment independent minds emerged, cracks formed everywhere. Independent thinkers don't obey blindly, don't fear questioning, and don't accept limits without reason. And once independence spreads, control collapses fast. Everything they designed to exhaust you, stress, delays, resistance, became the fuel instead. Instead of breaking down, you adapted. Instead of quitting, you recalibrated. Pain became experience. Struggle became wisdom. And the energy meant to destroy you ended up strengthening your foundation. You didn't fight the cage. You outgrew it. You expanded mentally, emotionally, and strategically until the cage no longer fit. That kind of growth doesn't make noise, but it changes everything. When someone outgrows limitations, those limitations lose relevance, and control dissolves naturally. Power built on fear, control, and exploitation always expires. It cannot sustain itself, it cannot evolve, and it cannot survive awareness. Their power looked permanent, but it was fragile. Yours, built on resilience and clarity, kept growing. Time exposed the difference. Your existence became evidence, proof that systems can fail, proof that pressure doesn't always win, proof that awareness changes outcomes. You didn't just survive, you demonstrated possibility. And possibility is dangerous to oppressive structures because it gives others courage. What you went through wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Every loss refined you. Every challenge trained you. Every attack upgraded your mindset. They thought they were ending you, but they were unknowingly transforming you. And now, you don't just move forward, you move with purpose, strength, and an unshakable understanding of your own power. Every obstacle they threw at you became a tool to sharpen your mind, strengthen your resolve, and redefine your strategy. While they believed hardship would weaken you, it actually forged you into someone smarter, tougher, and more unstoppable. Every attack, every attempt to slow you down, every challenge meant to break your spirit was converted into fuel that powered your growth. You didn't just survive the storm. You learned to dance in it, to master it, and to turn it into an advantage that they never saw coming. They wanted you to fear failure, to see it as the end, but every loss became a lesson, a stepping stone, a blueprint for your next victory. You discovered that failure isn't defeat, it's data. It's feedback that, when used wisely, transforms hesitation into action and mistakes into breakthroughs. Each time you were knocked down, you didn't just rise, you rose smarter, faster, and more unbreakable. And that is why their attempts to break you only accelerated your progress. Doubt is the silent killer of dreams, and they relied on it heavily. But you became the gatekeeper of your own mind. You refused to let their whispers of fear, their predictions of failure, or their strategies of manipulation dictate your worth. Every attempt to instill uncertainty only strengthened your belief in yourself. You didn't just ignore doubt. You turned it into a mirror, reflecting your own capabilities, proving that inner certainty is far stronger than any external pressure. The attacks were relentless, calculated, and designed to crush you emotionally, mentally, and strategically. But every blow, every strike meant to weaken you, only made your armor tougher. You learned to anticipate, to absorb, to transform the energy of opposition into resilience. They may have thought they were creating cracks, but all they did was craft a person who cannot be broken, someone whose foundation is now unshakable, and whose focus cannot be diverted. While their strategy was manipulation through money, influence, and fear, you relied on something far stronger, your principles. Integrity became your shield, and authenticity became your power. People are drawn to truth, not lies. They can manipulate for a moment, but they cannot sustain it when someone stands unwavering in honesty and vision. While their empire was built on borrowed obedience, your strength was built on respect earned and self-respect preserved, which is something no one can ever take from you. They built walls of influence and mountains of control, thinking size equals invincibility. But you proved them wrong. You learned that no empire can survive arrogance and ignorance. The higher they climbed on their illusions of superiority, the further they fell when reality caught up. Your persistence, your adaptability, and your refusal to bend allowed the giants to stumble while you grew stronger, proving that true power isn't measured in wealth or control. It's measured in resilience, courage, and vision. Where others would crumble under constant pressure, you thrived. Resistance became your default mode, your natural reaction to every attempt to control, manipulate, or intimidate you. You learned to fight not just with strength, but with strategy, not with anger, but with focus. Every challenge became an arena to demonstrate that you are untouchable, not because nothing can harm you, but because you are unshakable, disciplined, and prepared for anything that comes your way. They calculated numbers, influence, and networks, but they never accounted for the force of a single, focused, determined mind. One mind, unyielding and clear, can topple systems built on fear. One mind that refuses to comply can ignite movements, inspire others, and disrupt plans that took decades to construct. They thought isolation would weaken you, but it revealed your singularity, the unique strength of a mind that cannot be bent, broken, or bribed. They spent millions on strategies to control, delay, and diminish you. But all their elaborate plans collided headfirst with your vision. While they tried to distract and confuse you, you held a clear image of where you were going and who you were becoming. Vision is the most powerful weapon against manipulation because it creates a roadmap that no force can distort. And when your vision becomes immovable, no amount of interference can alter your trajectory. They wanted to warn others, to show what happens when you resist, but you became proof of the opposite. You became the living example of resilience, strategy, and unbreakable willpower. Others saw your growth and courage, and suddenly fear turned inward. They feared that their power could be challenged again. Your life became a mirror for their failures and a beacon for those who refused to be controlled. In the midst of chaos, financial threats, psychological attacks, and manipulative systems, you didn't sink. You rose. Chaos tested your focus, your patience, and your decision-making. And instead of surrendering, you elevated. You found clarity in disorder, strength in struggle, and opportunity in disruption. That's how leaders are forged, not in comfort, but in storms that would destroy ordinary people. You didn't just survive chaos. You harnessed it to reach heights they never imagined. Physical power can be challenged, money can be stolen, influence can be disrupted, but your mind cannot be touched unless you allow it. You fortified your thoughts, sharpened your judgment, and refused to react impulsively to manipulation. Mental resilience became your greatest weapon. They could attack you from every angle, but nothing could penetrate the fortress you built inside yourself, making you untouchable in the truest sense. They tried to confine you with rules, restrictions, and threats, but every limit they set became a challenge you accepted. You turned boundaries into hurdles, obstacles into tests of endurance, and restrictions into opportunities to innovate. When people aim to hold you back, they don't realize they are pushing you to redefine what's possible. You didn't just overcome limits, you crushed them entirely, proving that human potential is far greater than anyone else can imagine. They tried to isolate, intimidate, and silence you, assuming that without an audience, your influence would fade. But in that quiet, you discovered your inner power. You strategized, strengthened your resolve, and envisioned victories that they couldn't anticipate. Silence doesn't weaken you. It sharpens you. And when you acted, it wasn't just a comeback. It was a revelation that they could never contain the force they tried to suppress. At the end of it all, you didn't just make it through. You changed the game entirely. You took every attack, every manipulation, and every attempt to control you and turned it into a foundation for dominance. You became a force that cannot be measured by ordinary standards. A mind and spirit that refused to comply with outdated rules. You proved that true power isn't inherited, bought, or enforced. It's earned through courage, vision, and unrelenting persistence. And now, after everything, you are not just a survivor. You are the new standard.